All right. Welcome back to the Executive and Leader Development Series. I'm here with our local expert, Brian Gillum. And today we're going to be looking at 4 ways to boost your 2021 strategic planning. So, as many of you might have known or experienced, plans for 2020 were kind of thrown out the window back in March when the lockdown closing, all that took place and really threw a wrench into everything. So, looking at kind of questions regarding that. So, Brian, a lot of companies had plans that didn't work out in 2020. Do you think there are parts of that that can be salvaged? And what parts might those be?
Yeah, I think there are certainly parts that can be salvaged. I think of, we've got one client in particular that they had started an initiative to become more automated and improve efficiencies in their manufacturing environment. Sales were down, and when sales were down, it meant that production was down, and when production was down, it meant that they could actually get through their system implementation a lot faster than what they would have expected. So that would be an example of a strategic initiative that they had that actually got finished more quickly because their production was less than what it would have been in normal times. So there are certain elements of businesses and strategic plans that can continue forward if revenue's down, or maybe there are new opportunities or new markets that we can explore that we weren't in the past. So yes, this period is giving. It's interesting to see certain businesses have unique opportunities as a result of COVID that may not have existed if it didn't happen.
It almost sounds like it'd be helpful for some of these companies who were too busy to be able to have time to do this kind of thing, and this kind of forced them to not only do that, but they had some backup work for their teams to be able to do when work was just kind of slow.
Yeah, I mean, we have two examples of that, one on both sides. One, a client that had significant reduction in revenue. They received PPP money. It helped them bridge a gap for 3 months, and they were able to focus on all those things that they didn't have time to focus on. And so they came out in June, they came out of a lockdown and a downturn in a much better situation than they would have had it never happened. We have another client who's a home services business, and that industry in particular during COVID has just exploded. And so what they're seeing is 50, 60, 70% growth in revenue this year compared to last year. And it's giving them now an opportunity to maybe take advantage of acquisition opportunities sooner than maybe what they would have done had COVID not happened.
Because that actually came out of it better than they started.
Right.
So when we're thinking about the strategic plans for 2021, how would you approach that?
Well, I think I would approach it in a different way than it's ever been approached. And I think that what we see with our clients and leaders that we talk with during these times, if they approach their business plans, their businesses in different ways than they ever have, typically they're going to be more successful coming out of it. And so, for example, we've always looked at strategic plans as a 12-month, you typically have a 1-year strategic plan, maybe a 3-year, maybe a 5-year strategic plan. Well, now we're encouraging clients to look at this from more of a 3 to 6 month lens. How can you take maybe 3 to 5 strategic initiatives that you would initially, maybe before COVID, you would have said, we're going to look at the next 12 months of what we're going to do on these 3 to 5 initiatives. Maybe now you do is you take 1 or 2 and you say, this is going to be our core focus for the next 6 months. So what we're encouraging our clients to do is just approach the strategic planning process differently than they have. Don't use the old rules and the old standards that were in place, because it's so hard to, sitting here today where we might be entering another lockdown period, it's really hard to anticipate what is February or March going to look like. So how do we then focus on a small number of items in the next 2 to 3 months to make sure we're making some progress? And
when we're talking about strategic plans and initiatives, I mean, a lot of companies were affected first and foremost financially. And so when you talk about a plan for the next year, the first thing that might come to somebody's mind is the budget. So when you say strategic plan, like what all does that encompass? What's incorporated in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does incorporate budget. I mean, you're going to have the budget, and similarly, you might have to think about how do you create a budget for 3 months or 6 months, because maybe the next 12 months is too long of a view to look at for your budget. So when you think of the way I think of a strategic plan is you've got your vision, and that's where you want your business. It's your aspirational goal for your business. Your strategic plan is what are some of the major areas of focus to accomplish to help you reach some of those lofty long-term goals. So it may be entering into a new market. It may be expanding a product or a service. It may be a major improvement in your information systems. So what are some of those critical key items that are going to help your business advance to accomplish some of your long-term goals?
Okay. And it sounds like a strategic plan is a lot of opportunities versus strategies to do those. So like with COVID, what opportunities do you think it created? We talked about this a little bit, but what opportunities or strategies do you think need to be put on hold until after this is passed?
Yeah, so the opportunities it's created, I think it's industry by industry, client by client. We have a couple of examples of, back we talked earlier where you now have time to implement a new system faster. That was a benefit of COVID. It's really interesting to see certain industries and certain markets really benefit from some of the impact from COVID, while others are not. So for example, we have a client who's in healthcare, and while I would have expected that they would have a significant opportunity because of COVID, what they're seeing is that hospitals, they aren't buying new innovative products. They aren't looking at new innovative ways to launch other procedures because their focus is around addressing COVID. It's really an industry by industry, case by case example of certain clients, certain companies, certain industries. There are positives coming out of COVID and opportunities, and others are really impacted. We all know restaurants, bars have been significantly impacted by COVID. If no other reason than you're reducing the amount of customers in your business by 20% every day, or the peak time of when you earn money is now being taken away. Yeah. So there are some positives coming out of it, a lot of negatives, but the one thing that I've talked with all leaders about is how can you approach your business in a different way, so that in a unique and innovative way, so that when we're through this period, whenever it is, and however we get through it, you are now set up for success in the future.
Well, let's talk about leaders, because you mentioned them right there. A lot of companies have been affected. How do you think leaders should be viewed during this time and compensated, with the company doing worse, even though that leader is kind of spearheading that whole organization through this? Wow.
So, yeah, talk about leaders who are maybe doing their best work while the business is in a 30% decline. That's really tough. The starting point that we recommend is financially, what are you able to do to compensate your leaders through some sort of incentive program without jeopardizing your future, the future of the organization and your financial stability. So typically a starting point is, what can you do without putting your organization in a situation where you might not be viable next year? And so how do you communicate that with leaders and employees, being financially responsible while also not leading employees or leaders down a path of having fear around whether you're going to actually get through this period. So for us, what we recommend is starting with what can you do and how do you communicate that to employees and leaders in a way that doesn't invoke fear. And then if you can only do a little bit, how are you making decisions to reward your key people in a way that makes them feel really special and leads to long-term retention?
Okay. And so we're talking about like those goals and strategies for 2020. What if you didn't meet those goals? How can we move those into 2021? How can we carry those out?
Yeah, and that's a great question. You might start your strategic plan. You might say, what didn't get finished in 2020? And of those items, some of them maybe aren't as important as they once seemed to be. Some might be more important, and you say, okay, let's start here. And so a lot of times going into 2021, you think, let's start with what's left to do from 2020 and going through an evaluation to say, is it really needed? And the one other thing that we've talked with leaders about, and I actually had this conversation last week, during this time, it is really important to not take on too much. With so much uncertainty out there, so much unpredictability, if you go through a planning process and try to take on a lot, we already know based on the last 6 to 9 months that there are going to be curveballs thrown at all of us that we're going to need to respond to. So how can we approach the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next 9 months in a way that says these are going to be the top 2 or top 3 things that we need to make sure that we accomplish, instead of what are the 6 to 8 things that we want to be involved in.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Well, Brian, I appreciate all the insight you gave us. I think that's really helpful for not only leaders in an organization, but for their employees that are questioning how that's going to be handled and what they can expect. So appreciate all of that.
Sure.
If you guys are interested, checking out more of our videos, look us up at cmaxadvisors.com. We've done a few of these now. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and drop a comment below. Thanks.